Welcome to Stream of Conscience. I'm John Hartwell, your host, and I'm here today with Jeff Reichert, the writer and director of a film called Gerrymandering. It opened last October in a multiple city launch: New York, Los Angeles, San Diego, I think you said, Berkeley, San Francisco. A lot of California openings, which were because of the film, which had a lot to do with California and the redistricting process out there. So Jeff is very interested in, has made a movie about a subject that most people don't pay any attention to, and yet is absolutely critical for the way our democracy functions, or in cases, many places around the country, doesn't function so well. So Jeff, welcome again to Stream of Conscience. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks for having me.
Wanted to find out why it is that you have become so interested in gerrymandering, and as part of that, tell us exactly what it is.
Yeah, I think, like most people, I wasn't really aware of the process or the implications of the process through most of my life. We all live in a district, and those districts are all delineated in certain ways, and every delineating mark on a map has to be decided by somebody. So there's a reason for it. Lines just don't materialize there. And they're changed every 10 years in the redistricting process. And so in 2003, in the famous case when Tom DeLay went into Texas and pushed through a redistricting of the state's lines so that way that he could get more Republicans elected to Congress, and started thinking about the implications of that. And it's not something that just happens in Texas. The Texas case, the process was very extreme. The map itself was maybe not too far beyond the pale in a lot of different ways, but the process they went through to re-redistrict the state was extreme. But the same kind of power politics happened in every state every 10 years. And so you have essentially politicians looking at maps and deciding these boundary lines, but they're not doing it in most cases thinking about, well, what's best for the voters, what's best for representation. And so redistricting is something we have to do. It is the decennial redrawing of district lines to account for shifts in population. It should be just kind of a strictly administrative process to balance everything out. Gerrymandering is when that process is abused, and it's when redistricting is used either for the gain of a particular party, a particular ethnic or minority group, for a particular incumbent. That is, when it's being pushed in that direction, that's when you can classify it as gerrymandering.
So we have redistricting, which happens every 10 years. We have a census like we did in 2010, and then in 2011 we redraw all the lines to make them more balanced. And that process goes on because it's constitutionally required. What gerrymandering is taking that process another step and doing that redistricting based on other parameters. So we want to protect some politicians who are in office today, or we want to exclude somebody from office, or we want to make sure that one group is favored over another, and it could be any kind of group. So where have you seen this happening, and where did you focus on in your film?
Well, we looked at a lot of big states, because in big states you have lots of different kinds of interests, lots of different kinds of minority groups, and so it's really the stew of it. It gets very complicated. We looked a lot at California and an initiative that went ahead in 2008 to reform redistricting in the state.
And that was Proposition 11.
Proposition 11. And
right.
Then we went to Texas and took a look back at what happened in 2003. Just to give a little bit of perspective on which is what is still probably and will probably remain the most famous case of redistricting, of partisan redistricting.
Because that one in 2003 didn't occur after a census.
Didn't occur after a census.
It occurred simply because the Republican Party had more power at that time, and they decided to take advantage of it in the middle between censuses.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court said that was okay.
Yes.
Which is very troubling for democracy, I think. And we looked at Florida. Because Florida is another state where, again, to be a representative in Florida is really hard. You have many different kinds of constituencies. You have a state that's very oddly shaped geographically, and so the districts end up being very strange. And we met a state senator from Florida whose district runs from a very affluent Jewish community on the Atlantic Ocean in West Palm Beach, through the center of the state, which is very depressed, poor swamp communities, to the West Coast with Fort Myers, which is military, very conservative. And so he represents this district as best he can, traveling the 200 miles back and forth all of the time to figure out what his constituents want best.
Well, that doesn't sound so bad in the fact that the one part of his district is very liberal, another part of his district is very conservative, and a third part of his district, the first two are obviously actually pretty rich, and the one in the middle is very poor. So there's a bit of a balance there.
Mhm.
But I think what we more often see is districts that are all one way, or mostly one way, and so in that you might have extreme partisan politicians come out because there really isn't anyone to balance them off.
Sure, and that's the crux of the redistricting problem is the question of, you know, are the representatives that we're sending to Washington or our state legislators, are they actually representative of the people who live in these districts? And I think in a lot of cases they're not. They're either, you know, too far left, too far to the right, or not representing large swaths of their communities. And it's a debate that we can and should have. You can make an argument that, well, maybe what we should do is draw districts that are all safe all the time and will reliably elect a Democrat or Republican, so that way more people in those districts are happy with their representation. But we also like competition in the mix, and we feel that, you know, our votes should actually matter when we go out for these elections. And so, but if every district was competitive, you'd have more people dissatisfied with the representation. You'd also probably elect very few minorities to state legislatures or to Congress. And so there's a kind of art and the science to this, because
Right.
a lot of people look at the problem and say, well, let's just slap a grid on the thing and divide it up numerically and let that, and have all the districts be pretty and let that be that. But you still have to account for where people live and how they live against other people and what those what those things mean.
And in our political culture, we have primarily two major parties. There are some other parties out there, but generally speaking, we either elect Republicans or Democrats. And I think most of the redistricting questions come down to how many Democrats are you going to put into this district, how many Republicans are going to go into that one, how balanced is that?
Mm-hmm.
So that's obviously one of the issues that's on the table. And the one that here in this state, up in Hartford, where redistricting is underway right now, that will be the major factor of, you know, how many Republicans do sitting next to Bridgeport get incorporated in Bridgeport, and is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the way we run elections here, which is called first past the post, winner take all. So essentially what that means is that if you have two candidates running of two different parties, and one of those candidates gets 50% of the vote plus one, they collect all of the representation from that district. So they have to represent everybody, even the people who didn't vote for them.
Right.
Coupled with the way we do redistricting here, it really disadvantages third parties.
It does.
And I think it squelches a lot of voices that we have in the system.
Right.
And it pushes people to not participate in third parties. If we had a more proportional system with a different kind of redistricting process, I think you'd have a more robust Libertarian Party. I think you'd have a more robust Green Party nationwide, because then you'd actually have a chance of electing those folks,
Right.
as opposed to the feeling of kind of squandering those votes if you don't vote for the Democrat or you don't vote for the Republican, and then the person of the opposite political persuasion wins. So these things are all really tied together.
So here in Connecticut, the redistricting is in the hands of the state legislature.
Mm-hmm.
There's an 8-member committee actually put together, and it includes actually the leadership from both parties in both houses. So the state Senate and the state House, both the Democratic and the Republican leaders. So basically it's an inside job that's going on,
Mm-hmm.
and we know that right now there are staffs on both sides working on redistricting, and that at the end of the day, the plan has to be approved by 2/3 of the legislature. And since neither party controls 2/3 in either house, it's clearly going to be the case that the Republicans are going to come to the table and be able to get some of what they want. And probably it's going to focus first and foremost on protecting the interests of the members who are there today.
Sure.
Districts are usually drawn to protect incumbents, and then they try to see what else they can get. If you were a citizen in Connecticut and interested in this on an ongoing process, because they're going to do this once and we're not going to do it again for another 10 years, what would you be doing?
And the things I would be looking at, first, there are so many great, and this is what makes this round of redistricting different than any other round we've ever had. There are so many great software packages available for free. You can go online to publicmappingproject.org, and you can actually redistrict different states using real census data. And I think
And we could do that for Connecticut.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And if you just going through the process of redistricting and thinking about, well, where am I putting this line and why am I putting that there? It's all of a sudden it just opens up a whole different kind of understanding of the geography in which you live.
Okay.
And I think those tools are being used all over the place right now.
So I'm sitting here at my computer nerding away,
Mm-hmm.
figuring out where the lines are supposed to be. What do I do with that?
Well, I mean, the great, and this is something, if you can find organizations who are working on redistricting, many states are having what they're calling either shadow commissions or competitions, where they solicit plans from the public and then present them to editorial boards, newspapers, the media, et cetera, and say, look, well, we have gotten high school students to produce plans that do better on all these different redistricting metrics than what the legislature is likely to produce. Why don't we use that as a mechanism for holding them a bit more accountable?
Is there a national group that's setting out a series of criteria that you should be using?
Well, I mean, there are traditional redistricting principles, and I think things like compact districts, contiguity, protection of the Voting Rights Act, communities of interest. But I think it's really hard to have national criteria because every state is very different,
right,
and has very different political traditions and political culture and different groups who live there. And so it's hard to say, this is the way we should do redistricting,
right,
full stop. It's really difficult. And I think it's hurt the reform movement in a certain sense because it's great to be able to organize around something specific.
There's no cookie cutter approach.
There's no cookie cutter approach, which
Okay.
is, it makes it tough, but again, just because it's difficult doesn't mean it's not worth kind of pushing for. So I would be drawing my own maps, and I would be making sure that I'm aware of when all the hearings are taking place, because
And there will be hearings here in Connecticut. They haven't yet published the schedule, but there will be hearings, and they have to finish the process by the middle of September. So there isn't a lot of time. You can believe that they're working on this in their committee, and their staffs are working on this right now. But the public has not been invited in. My concern is that when the public is invited in, they're basically going to look at a cake that's already been baked. There won't be much time to make any changes.
that certainly happens. But I think just because that is a likely outcome of the public hearings, again, it's too often folks have said, well, these public hearings are a sham, so let's not even bother showing up. Then they don't even get covered by the media. They aren't even talked about.
Right.
If people are at these hearings packing them to the gills and saying, this is what we want our districts to look like, and really raising a ruckus, I think even if the lines turn out, that don't turn out the way that the public is arguing for them, it becomes a story. And I think politicians, even though they do have redistricting as a way to insulate themselves, they still have to be reactive to us to a certain extent. And they are able to do the things that they do in redistricting because they think nobody cares. And
Right.
it just kind of happens, and
Right.
they have a hearing and 4 people show up. And so they feel that it just gives them a kind of immunity to do whatever they want.
So if you're interested in this, if you're not interested, first of all, you should be. And when you become interested, you should basically get informed. And one way to do it is to, as you say, download the software and play for the lines yourself. There's no reason why you shouldn't. Secondly, find out when the hearings are going to be. Make sure your voice is heard either in the hearings or in the newspaper or directly with your state representative. And make sure that you have a place at the table.
Yeah, I think even just knowing the boundaries of the district in which you live is a really powerful thing, because you can look at a map. You can go to, there's a website called endgerrymandering.com. If you go there and you can type in your address and you can see the contours of all of your districts, it raises a lot of questions. Why is that block there? Why is this block not there?
Right.
Why are the people across the street from me in a different district than I am in? Why does that make sense?
Okay, well, Jeff, thanks so much for coming in today,
Thank you.
and for the work that you've done and the work that you're doing. I think it's really exciting and very, very useful. Again, Jeff Reichert, writer and director of Gerrymandering, his first film, actually, but another one coming on the healthcare system in the United States and why it is that some places don't actually get any healthcare. Gerrymandering is a term that has been used for a long time, and here with me today to talk about gerrymandering is Doug Sutherland, another member of our Democracy for America group here in Fairfield County. So Doug, welcome back to Stream of Conscience.
Thank you.
What is gerrymandering?
Well, gerrymandering is the manipulation of the redistricting process for some type of political gain. And every 10 years, as you said, this reapportionment happens. There's 435 congressional seats that have to be apportioned out among the states. And so that gets done through a process called redistricting. And every state, Congress doesn't mandate how that redistricting process takes place. It's up to each state to figure out how to do it. Several states, have independent commissions that do this process, and a lot of people think that's a fair process. But the majority of states do it through, a political process. Either the state legislature controls it or some other political body. And that's where the biases, come into the picture.
So redistricting with a partisan basis. I'm shocked.
Yes, imagine that. I mean, everybody likes to think that America has we founded the great democracy. It's open, it's fair. Every year you go to the polls or every 2 years or 4 years you go to the polls and vote for who you think the best candidate is, and you have some effect on the outcome. But it turns out that a huge majority of the districts around the country almost never have a competitive race. In other words, year after year, one side or the other wins by a 70% majority or more. And so in those districts, actual voters, individuals, are not having a very big effect on their democracy. Yeah.
And that's true also as well at the state level. In the state Senate and the state House, many of the districts here in Connecticut are drawn in such a way that either a Republican will always win or a Democrat will always win. And so the real election takes place, if there is one at all, in the primary, when the party that's in power in that district is selecting the candidate, and that candidate then goes on to an easy victory.
If you ever look at any of the districts around the country, it boggles the mind to see how some of them have been drawn up. Some of them are, in North Carolina, there's a district where they say if you drive down the road with both doors open, each side of the car is in a different district, all up like, I think it's I-95. So some of these things make no sense when you look at them. But if you're a politician and you look at them, they make a lot of sense because they affect the election.
Doug, let's talk about some of the basic concepts of gerrymandering. And I know that there are 4 major themes that might appear. They don't all have to appear, but it's possible. The first one's called packing. So what does packing mean?
Right. Well, packing is when you try to gather up a group of voters of some kind, Republicans, Democrats, a certain minority, and you try to put them in one district. And so basically you're setting aside that district for that type of voter, and basically, you do that for whatever political reason you have, and so that's called packing.
And so the voters who have been packed together in one district are obviously not voting in another district. And so while you're concentrating them in one place and basically giving away that seat, you're diminishing their potential influence in other places.
Right, and also the voters in that district, if they are not necessarily part of that group that's been packed into their district, they have very little say. And, no matter how they vote, it's been already predetermined that that district is going to be one side or the other.
Right. So let's look at another methodology that's used. It's called cracking.
Right. And that's where, you separate voters into multiple districts, diluting their power, and in some cases maybe eliminating their ability to elect anyone who might represent them.
So where if you were packing a group together, they obviously would be in the majority. If you crack that group and spread them out, you could perhaps take that same group of people who would have been in a majority and have at least one seat, perhaps spread them out over 3 or 4 districts and end up in a minority in all of those districts and virtually have no representation whatsoever.
That's correct. Yeah.
So packing and cracking.
Right.
So we have another one that sounds somewhat similar, or at least it rhymes, called hijacking. What is hijacking?
Right. Well, hijacking occurs when you've got a candidate, a lot of times it might be an incumbent, who's in a certain district. He's very well known in that district. He's put a lot of time in building up a constituency, and so he's going to be very hard to defeat. But if you can redraw the lines so that suddenly his house is not in the district where he has support, now he has to start from ground zero and start over again. And so that totally opens up that district for a new candidate.
So that's hijacking. You're
That's
basically
hijacking.
Taking the district away from the representative, changing the district in such a way that the district no longer looks like it used to,
Right.
and the person's in basically a new district.
Right, and sometimes that can look very blatant. I mean, there's been redistricting where the line just goes right around that guy's house. There's a movie about gerrymandering, and in that movie they focus partly on a case down in Brooklyn where the Brooklyn machine had controlled the district for years, and basically and a challenger tries to come along, and he did a lot of hard work and got out and shook hands and built up support, and he got 40% of the vote, And that scared the political machine enough that they just redrew the lines around his house, and now if he wants to run again in the next year, he's got to start all over
Start from scratch.
So,
wow.
yeah.
Okay. One more the tricks of the trade here. It's called kidnapping.
Right.
What's that?
Right, and that's a situation where you've got two districts that have two very strong candidates, and they have a very good chance of getting reelected. And if those are your opponent and you have control of the redistricting process, you can redraw the lines and put them into the same district. And of course, two people can't represent the same district, so you've effectively eliminated one of your opponents even before the voting booth is opened.
So we have cracking and packing and hijacking and kidnapping. All are tools of the trade for
Right.
gerrymandering.
Right.
In addition to gerrymandering, what we often have in the redistricting process is very simply incumbent protection.
Right, and that's something that's really called sweetheart gerrymandering, where basically, both sides agree amongst themselves to just protect the status quo. And again, that takes away, power from the individual voter.
Now, let's tie these district lines and the way they're drawn to the political environment overall. So I'm thinking actually about the type of person who ends up representing a district. So if you have a district that is completely safe for a Democrat or completely safe for a Republican, in my experience, what happens then is that those districts move toward the extreme. That if you have a Republican district where a Democrat stands no chance, then the most conservative Republicans tend to end up in that seat. And likewise, if there's a Democratic district that is not where Republicans have no chance, then right. the seat starts to shift toward the other extreme. And I think what happens then is that what we see in Congress today, for example, the Republican Party as a whole has shifted very much to the right across the board. Mm-hmm. And the Democratic Party is also very much more liberal than it used to be 20, 30, 40 years ago. So there's not much of a mixture anymore.
Right.
And there's very few people in the center because there are very few districts that are really hard fought.
Right. I think the other aspect of this too is that they become less responsive to the voters. Mm-hmm. And they know their seat is safe, and so I think they're much more responsive to special interests and corporate money and corporate interests because they don't have to worry about getting reelected every 2 years or every 6 years or whatever the case may be. And that's also very bad for democracy.
I'd like to point out that here in the 4th District here in Fairfield County where we live, for a long time the 4th District was seen as a safe Republican seat. And over time that changed. And Chris Shays had 2 very difficult elections with Diane Farrell in 2004, 2006, before losing his seat in 2008 to Jim Himes. And then Jim had a very close election in 2010. So the 4th District here is, in fact, a seat that goes back and forth, most recently.
Right.
Historically, no Republican. Now it's a Democratic seat, but it's not a safe seat by any
right.
measure. And in fact, one could easily redraw the 4th District so that it had, lower Fairfield County, didn't have Bridgeport, and instead went north through Danbury and up into Litchfield County. Right. And that would completely change the tenor of the district.
Absolutely.
Basically, the state is in play. There are lots of ways that the lines can be redrawn. We know that they will be redrawn. We just don't know how. It's something that people should pay attention to. The lines definitely will be different for the 2012 election. And you can bet that at the heart of a lot of it will be who's in play now, who's in power now, and who they want to protect going forward.
Right.
Doug, thanks again for coming in.
Thank you.
And now for our Stream of Conscience book review with Anne Galloway. She's looking this week at Byron Dorgan's Take This Job and Ship It.
They say you can't judge a book by its cover, but in the case of former North Dakota Senator Byron Dorgan, his book is an exception. Like it or not, and I do like it, Dorgan immediately lets you know where he stands. Take This Job and Ship It is just his opening salvo. The book's subtitle tells you even more about its contents, how corporate greed and brain-dead politics are selling out America. Published in 2006, there is nothing dated about this book. 5 years later, we continue to see U.S. manufacturers closing American factories, laying off hundreds of workers, and shifting production to joint ventures in China, even in high-tech industries like solar panels. So what's wrong with this picture? Wasn't green energy supposed to be a potential growth industry for the U.S.? Dorgan would call this picking our brains and our pockets. Dorgan provides numerous examples of the selling of America piece by piece. He's especially troubled about the World Trade Organization, which he calls the most powerful legislative and judicial body in the world. This unelected body, headed by those with a corporate mindset, has no constitution or Bill of Rights. It does nothing to protect child labor or the environment, and doesn't allow for bans against goods produced under ruthless dictators. Yet it is empowered to drive the global economic agenda. Moving jobs elsewhere to save labor costs hurts sales at home because American purchasing power is reduced, and exploited laborers have little money to spend. Dorgan warns that protecting America's industrial base is critical to the nation's defense. Yet in 2006, in the middle of George Bush's second term and his global war on terror, nearly 400 companies were doing business in terrorist-sponsored states. And while we cite safety concerns about importing drugs from Canada, we outsource airplane manufacturing to Mexico, where construction and inspection standards do not measure up. Warren Buffett, that rare billionaire with a social conscience, once said, "If there is class warfare in America, my side is winning." Take this job and ship it as a call to action. Dorgan says there are 3 simple steps that would do away with current abuses while also cutting the deficit. Repeal tax breaks now given to those who move U.S. jobs overseas. Treat companies that set up foreign subsidiaries in tax haven countries as if they never left the United States. Remove their ability to avoid paying taxes. Tax foreign subsidiaries of U.S. corporations as part of combined worldwide income, eliminating the opportunity to transfer pricing and avoid taxes. Dorgan supports fair trade, but not free trade, and he describes what amounts to the selling of America. Corporations are too busy counting their profits. Politicians are too busy collecting their campaign contributions from these same corporations, and consumers are too distracted rushing to Walmart and Target to buy their imported products. And then we wonder what happened to all of the good jobs here at home. Dorgan makes it clear what's happened, and it's up to us to put a stop to this before it's too late. This has been a Stream of Conscience book review. I'm Ann Galloway. Thanks for watching.
This has been another segment of Stream of Conscience, celebrating local activism, and we believe you can make a difference. Differences can be made, and you can do it. So come and see us at the Silver Star Diner first Wednesday of the month between 7 and 9 p.m. We're always welcoming new members.